This is 7 Minutes Cyber with Danny Lawlor of Aquest and myself, Sam Glynn of Code in Motion. And the 7 minutes start now. So for this episode, and actually running into the second episode of this series, myself and Danny are just going to talk about what goes on when a regulated firm is trying to take on the services of an outsourced partner. And in my world, that would be, software as a service or a reg tech or a fintech type solution. But in Danny's world of regulated firms, it could be any type of outsourcing contract. So the background to this is in my role, I speak to a lot of regulated firms and talk about the challenges that they face around IT security. And inevitably outsourcing comes up as an issue whereby they need to prove the IT security of their partners and outsourced providers. And then on the service provider side, I do talk to a lot of service providers who are trying to sell into the regulated firms and are struggling to prove and provide evidence that they have security nailed. So for this first episode, we're going to talk about outsourcing in general and what a regulated firm needs and expects. And then running into the second episode, we might focus in on the IT security and cybersecurity elements of that. So to kick it off, Danny, if you want to go from there.
Sure. So as you said, Sam, in this scenario, we are both working for a regulated firm. I'm the outsourcing consultant or the head of outsourcing or in a legal or compliance role, and you're more generally on the information technology side. So if we were looking at engaging, let's say a reg tech firm, but any kind of outsourcing agent, let's assume that it's reg tech and let's assume that the technology has passed muster. So we're happy that the technology solves the problem it's told us it's going to solve, and we're happy with the pricing. But that's really only the beginning of the story. Getting from there to getting the product in and into the firm still is quite a journey to travel. And a lot of that is because regulators are very focused on what it is that regulated firms do when they outsource. So it's not enough just to hire and bring in this service. You have to go through a whole process before you do that. So one of the first questions is around information security. We're going to cover that in the next video. But beyond that, it's very important both as a regulated firm, but particularly as a firm selling into a regulated firm, to understand what the consequences are of taking on a regulated firm as a client. So first of all, let's talk about sub-outsourcing. If I outsource to a service provider, whether reg tech or otherwise, and they want to onward delegate something to a third party, they cannot do that unless they get my prior consent. So immediately, you as a provider into a regulated firm start to become handcuffed in what you can do in the future, because you can't be as dynamic and as innovative off the bat as you might have been in the past. If you want to change your operating model and start to use your own outsourced providers, you cannot do that until you get prior consent from your client. So you've got
that very much reflects what happens in the data protection world. GDPR clauses and all that, where you have to know the sub-processors and you have to be provided as a reg firm or as a data controller. You have to be informed when that list is going to change and have the ability to object to that if there's a personal data element to it. But this is broader.
Oh, it is broader, and in the GDPR world, there is an ability to give a kind of a general consent to the onward processing of data without needing in every instance to give consent, whereas for outsourcing generally, you do probably need to give consent each time there's going to be sub-outsourcing. So that's the first thing. Another thing you need to be aware of as the provider into a regulated firm is that you will have to grant that regulated firm rights of access to your premises, to your people, and to your information that relates to the outsourced services being provided. But not only do you have to give that to the firm, you also have to give the same rights to the regulator of that firm. So you have to understand and be ready for the fact that you may have the regulator of the client that you have bashing on the door, looking to get access at short notice to understand and look at your records and interview your people and understand what it is that you've been up to. So how are you going to cope with that? How are you going to train your people to understand, to let them in and deal with those kinds of interactions? That's a whole new world for these businesses, which typically are not regulated.
I wonder how another thing, if you're in a shared office, if you're in a WeWork or a Regis, how do you?
What are the practicalities?
Yeah.
So another thing to look at then is certification. So you will probably find that the regulated firm every year will want to know that you are doing what you said you would do, that there hasn't been any changes to your sub-outsourcing, or that the service is as it should be, and that there haven't been any issues that affect the services that you're providing to the regulated firm. So how are you going to deal with that? Are you going to let each regulated firm come on site and do a do their own inspection to make that certification for themselves? Are you going to have a pooled approach where they all come in one batch, or one person or one firm comes in to represent them all? Or are you going to do self-certification? And if you're going to do self-certification, how are you going to approach that and do it in a way that will satisfy your clients that it's been done properly and independently? And then finally, what's the governance around all of that? So if I'm a regulated firm and I'm going to hire you to do something, how do I know that you're not going to forget to get my consent before you outsource or sub-delegate? How do I know that if you are giving me a self-certification, that that's not just something written on the back of a napkin, that you've actually gone through a fair process to give me that certification? So as I said, when you are a provider selling into these types of firms and you start to take on regulated firms, your world changes, and you need to understand that it's still worth your while getting your regulated firms as clients. It's not going to stop you doing that, but you have to understand what's involved, and you have to be on top of it so that you don't end up in a position where you've caused your client to breach. Because if anything is going to damage your relationship with that client, it's where they get into trouble with their regulator because you've not held up your end of it.
1 minute left. In a way that what comes to mind is a phrase that a regulated client mentioned recently, which is, if you're a SaaS or a RegTech or a FinTech, yes, it's great that you can do the magic stuff, but before you're allowed to do the magic stuff in a regulated firm, you need to do the boring stuff, which is all of this governance and evidencing and accountability and all that thing that the reg firm itself has to deal with every day, but maybe you as a hotshot tech firm have never had to deal with.
Yeah, this is not the sexy stuff. The sexy stuff is the tech solution that allows you to, eliminate thousands of pages of paperwork from your life and hit a button. And that's great. And that's where, when you go on site to do your demos, that's what you're focusing on. But regulated firms live with a regulator looking over their shoulder all the time. And as you start to service regulated firms, you find that gaze starts to look in your direction. So as much as anything, it's a culture shift. Understand that now you need somebody on site. There's our 7 minutes up. Somebody in your business, start to ask that question. What does this change mean for our regulated clients?
Okay, great. Well, we'll roll into part 2 and see you on the other side.
I'll see you there.